rather than listening to me, but please let me introduce them first. So our first panelist is Christian Trebert. He's a journalist on the New York Times Visual Investigations team, and he's also known for his work at Bellingcat that he was at before that. He won a prize in 2017, a European Press Prize Innovation Award for his reconstruction of the attempted military coup in Turkey using leaked WhatsApp messages and social media content. So from the Netherlands, Christian earned his bachelor's degrees in international relations and philosophy at the University of Groningen and his master's in conflict security and development at King's College London. We also have Melissa. Melissa Hannum is an expert on nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and their delivery vehicles. Don't you believe it? Oh my goodness, she is. She uses open source information to analyze capabilities, verify treaties, and make policy recommendations. And I'd also like to add that Melissa was one of my virtual mentors when I was first doing OSINT in particular, because the OSINT community, it puts things out there and it shares methodologies and techniques, and Melissa was certainly one of the people I looked up to and still do. Oh my goodness, yes. Raina Rogers, our third panelist, she's a master's candidate in non-proliferation and terrorism studies at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey. She's a graduate research assistant at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, using open source tools to understand technological advancements of countries' nuclear weapons programs. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists now one by one to kind of give how you got into OSINT and kind of what you were doing before this. So I'll start off in the answer I introduced the panelists. So Christian, please, how did you get into OSINT and what were you doing just before that?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Grant, and it's great to be with Raina and Melissa on this panel. I mean, for me, I basically, the first thing I started doing after the first job I ever had after I graduated from King's College, right, a master, was in OSINT actually. So I think I'm more of like the newer generation doing this kind of stuff, I would say. So yeah, I used to travel a lot when I was in high school, and hitchhiking with friends through Europe. In Europe it's easy to travel with the Dutch passport because the European Union, no borders. And all this traveling took us further to Iran, to Iraq, and we went down from the Netherlands to South Africa. And I always had something like, oh, I would love to do a job, or I'd love to do something where I can do like more, can learn more about like so many things that are going on in the world. So I was always thinking about either journalism or diplomacy, but I think I was always too outspoken for diplomacy on certain issues. So I think I naturally gravitated towards journalism, and I tried some freelance journalism because I had made contacts in countries like Syria and Iraq when I was traveling there. When the most recent conflict started, it was easy for me to get relatively access, and I kind of felt by myself like, why am I doing this? Because I felt like I'm not the best writer in the world. I'm not the best photographer in the world. I do really like it, but there are a lot of international journalists that do a way better job than I do. And more dominantly, I would say there are a lot of local journalists that don't even get the chance. So why would I be from the Netherlands, like, mediocre stories that have already been told by others? Why would I do that? And it was at that time that I became very inspired by Elliot Higgins. He was at the time Brown Moses. This is 2013, 2014, 2015. Who founded then Bellingcat, right? And was showing like from behind his laptop, he could suddenly investigate airstrikes. Like in Iraq, you would see an airstrike or hear about an airstrike happening in the distance, but it was in Islamic State held territory and you wouldn't be able to access it. And he would be investigating airstrikes from behind his laptop and find out sometimes way more info. And I'm not saying by any means that on-the-ground journalism or research is not important. It really is. But I was very, very, got very enthusiastic about like, wow, you do original reporting by using these online sources, like maybe a propaganda video from Islamic State, combining it with satellite imagery. So that's how I got into it. I started tweeting about it in 2015 when I was doing my master's in London. And actually, I was one of the interns of Grant, I would say, also related on OSINT. And this kind of started to merge together, you know, like I loved it a lot. I put a lot of output on Twitter, and you know, people started picking it up. And that's I was really lucky that people on Twitter started noticing it, including Elliot, and was like, "You want to join Bellingcat?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I'd love that." And it was all voluntarily, and for a year or two. Um, so that's how I kind of got started. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. Just tell me like to shut up. I think you're muted, Grant.
I can go next, probably. I don't know, I'll just say that I had a bit of a leg up in the science world because my mother has a PhD in biology and my father has a PhD in physics. And much to their dismay, I didn't love science for science's sake the way they did, but I did love international security. And I found that if I could use science to explain my answers, people would trust my answers more. And as a 20-something-year-old woman in political science, it carried more weight. So I think probably the first time I ever used it in an intentional kind of way was back in 2004, just as Google Earth launched for the very first time. And I heard that there was a missile launch and that it came from a little town called Musudan-ri in North Korea. So I figured I would try this new software program called Google Earth, and I found the town, and then I searched all around the town, and then eventually I found a launch pad. And I was so excited that like a regular person like me could do that I kind of got bit by this bug. And there was so little known about North Korea to the outside world that I just wanted to find more and more. And Google Earth was my way of exploring at that time. And of course, it's gotten much more complicated and fancy since then. But back in 2004, that was cutting edge.
Hello, thank you for carrying on. I'm back. I'm sorry I missed a little bit of that. My machine crashed. I switched to another one. Raina, could you tell us about how you got into OSINT?
I would have to say my entrance into OSINT has to be the latest of the group. I started my master's in 2019, and we are required to take 2 courses, either one that was in geolocating and geospatial tools, or one that is a workshop on memo writing. And I was like, I don't want to take the memo writing workshop. So I took this, the geolocating and geospatial workshop and kind of fell in love with it. I saw it as a puzzle, and like it can be really frustrating, especially when you're trying, like you'll get a picture of a place and they're like, our teacher at the time, Ann Pellegrino, was like, go find this. And you were like, but she had given us the tools, and essentially it kind of went from there. I went from using Google Earth to figure out locations of countries, nuclear sites, to looking at missile launches to figure out the acceleration that gave us information about what kind of payload it would have. And so I kind of dabble in different parts of OSINT. And so I'm not a pure expert in one area, but that's kind of like my personality. I like to know a lot about a lot of things. And so it's just been a really interesting and great ride. And I've been able to put that to use in my work at CNS, which has been a really amazing opportunity. I work with individuals who on a daily basis, that like OSINT is what they live and breathe, and like learning from them, seeing their passion. And it's funny because I hadn't paid attention early on. Like my friend was like, you should join this panel. And then when I looked at the people who were on the panel, I was like, I learned from them in class last semester. So it's really great to kind of hear their backstories again and remember like the work that they did and how they got there, and how essentially it's possible for anyone who has a little bit of interest to get into the field.
So with all that, like we've got the kind of the foundations of how you guys moved into OSINT. So how did you kind of start building the house, I guess? Like how did the knowledge come after you started? Like what did you do, or what tools did you use, or what kind of courses did you take to take your knowledge up? Melissa, to you.
Sure. So, you know, as I've told you before, Grant, there weren't really any classes on the subject when I was in my master's program. So for me, it was kind of exploring what was out there. I think, you know, when I graduated from my master's program at SIPA, I had been doing an internship with International Crisis Group in Seoul. And so I started working there. And because the subject that we were studying was North Korea, and North Korea was so closed, we just had to find ways of getting information any way we could. And so using the satellite imagery on Google Earth really was in many ways the best way we could get information, because we were not allowed to travel there. And I think in the beginning, it was very simple kinds of things where you'd hear of a city. So you'd go to that city and you'd look for things that seemed like you could launch a rocket off of, or that that you think might be the kind of structure you would expect from a reactor. And over time, I sort of taught myself tips and tricks of what you would expect at some of these places. And it was hard because I hadn't ever been to any of those places before. But as I got more and more interested, I made it a personal passion to go visit rocket launch sites. And, you know, just driving down the highway, you know, if I saw like a cement plant, I'd like mark it down, and then I'd go back and look at that cement plant because I knew I'd driven past it. I knew what it looked from the side, and then I wanted to see what it looked like at the top. And I wanted to know what kind of cement it was making and what all the equipment looked like. But after that, I needed to increase my skills. You know, it was sort of like every time I figured something out, I wanted to try something new. So I really did rope my family in. You know, my father actually helped me develop the method for measuring frame rate to determine how fast an object was accelerating off the launch pad. And he's a physicist, and that's something that Raina's doing now as well. And I was just smiling because I have a photo actually of myself with my kid on the kitchen counter, my dad leaning over the computer and my sister leaning over the computer, and we're all sitting there doing math that I swore I wouldn't do in high school, but I really wanted to do then. For me, the fun part is increasingly not just getting the answer, because it's euphoric when you figure out like, aha. But trying harder and harder things to do. It's just keeps me really interested and passionate about learning new types of things.
So is that kind of, I mean, is it, would you kind of liken it to gambling or scoring a goal in football, kind of the euphoria you feel when you've kind
Need
of
one more hit.
yeah, you've been going after something for a while, and I guess not everything works out, at least when I try things, but the things that do, they really will sustain you through a lot of, I mean, you basically said I did something I swore I would never do. I learned some math properly just so I could do this like single OSINT problem. Christian, what was it like for you?
I mean, I love what Melissa says with this this euphoric moment, right? Like, like I said, I started on Twitter, so I think a lot of people that are doing this start on Twitter out of like most like a more like a hobby or something on the side, right? Like it's like the fascination what you can find online by looking at things that you're interested in, whether that is North Korea, whether it is the Netherlands, whether it's the US, whether it's Colombia, Nigeria, you know, it doesn't really matter, but whatever, well, what kind of topic, but it's more like this wealth of information that you can find online. And I had to laugh because there used to be this account, I think it was a Japanese account, was tweeting a lot in Japanese, and it would always say Eureka when the geolocation was found, because we were always like trying to geolocate, mostly when I started in 2015, airstrikes, right? Predominantly airstrikes by the US-led coalition, because there was very little reporting on the potential, not the potential, but the possible civilian casualties that happened due to US-led airstrikes. And we did it the same with Russian airstrikes, but the Russian Minister of Defense was lying about it anyway, and it felt like, you know, there could be some impact there, and very important for, you know, I'm from the Netherlands. The Netherlands was one of the biggest air forces, or like the biggest contributors to those airstrikes, and there was like very little reporting in it in the Netherlands. So we would always like try to find it, and it was indeed a feeling when you find the exact location where something happened. It's like, oh wow, you know. But similar, I think, to Melissa, like I did start doing my master at King's College London, of course, where I met you, Grant. But and I signed up for a course that was taught by Elliot. But that course would only start the second half of the semester, or the second semester. I don't know what the right terminology is, but the second part of the year, of the academic year. And before that started, I had become so enthusiastic about this stuff and doing it myself that once we had the class at King's College London, Elliot was like presenting my geolocations on the screen. I'm like, wow, that's so cool. That's my stuff, you know? So it goes to show, I think, if anything, that this is really, if for anyone with a computer and an internet connection, I think you don't need any education, right? You don't need a course. It's really, I think, what you need is like the interest and an internet connection on a laptop to get started, and then you can really quickly become part of circles on Twitter that are interested in a certain niche topic. And I think that's really the empowering part, right? Like collaborating. Like I work now at the New York Times, but it's not because I had a good education or this or that, but it's like, hey, you're good at something like this, we want to have something like that. And I think, you know, you now see all over the world, we have collaborations with people doing the exact same thing, you know, and that's really cool.
I mean, that's such a good insight to those questions. I'll move on to Raina before I start derailing the conversation. Sorry.
Thank you. I'd have to say for me, how I kind of pushed it, it has been a challenge, especially because I tend to focus on North Korea as well, and looking in the country and looking for those markers. So it's been great because my supervisor at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies is Dr. Jeffrey Lewis. And so I'm sure most of the people who are on the webinar today are aware of him. He does some great work. And so like, if I have a question, I can go to him. But also on my downtime, a lot of times I'm either working on projects that we have at the center, or I'm working on things on my own. But what's really nice is one of the things that Christian said is that there's a community out there. And so if you have questions, you can go to them. There are YouTube channels that will do this. There's Twitter. I have some friends who do amazing things just for the fun of it. I had a friend who found a picture of his grandfather, I believe, during the Korean War. And so he took the picture, he used some sun calculations to figure out the location, and then geolocated it and did a side by side. And so it's amazing work. Or sometimes like we would get homework where it'd be a picture and it just looks like a forest and a road, and Jeffrey would be like, go find it. And so it's those things where it's not something that's really obvious, maybe from the sky, but learning how to like use the tools that have been given to you and finding something that you really enjoy. So for me, one of my favorite things to do is like kind of once I've found the information, because one of my passions is like missiles. And so once I've found all of the information through open source tools, I will then go and model those missiles. And sometimes I'm doing the modeling for work, and other times I'm just doing the modeling for fun because it is a skill that you have to hone. And sometimes it looks great, and sometimes it will fly, and other times it won't. But essentially, it really is just enjoying what you do, and then not being like complacent once you get to a certain level, pushing yourself, like Melissa said, to find things that are harder, and using the community and the tools that you have available to you in order to kind of grow within your craft.
So I'm kind of feel like I'm picking up a thread of like having so much passion that you're able to like, you're like, well, I really want to do this. I'm going to do all these other, like learn all these other techniques and capabilities that I otherwise would never have wanted to learn, and just push through them because I want to be able to do this geolocation better. I want to be able to understand this facility or this missile or this thing that's happening that I'm studying. I just want to pull on one particular thread. So I'm like a nuclear arms control person with like a side of OSINT, I guess. And I was a physicist for a long time, just purely. And one of the reasons I particularly moved to nuclear wasn't just, well, I'm a physicist, so it's easier. It was this kind of responsibility that physics started this whole process of nuclear weapons. So we should kind of be part of the team that makes sure nothing terrible happens. So that kind of community responsibility. So Christian, is a like on the air war stuff with Dutch participation, was that certainly kind of part of your motivation?
Yeah, very much so. Like, I think what struck me being a citizen of the Netherlands, and the Netherlands being often portrayed as, oh, this transparent, liberal country, it was really striking to see that after the UK, France, and the US, it was the Netherlands, the Dutch Royal Air Force, that was conducting the most bombings on the so-called Islamic State, or what they said were targets on the so-called Islamic State. And I think, not to put like a whole discussion about the air war, whether it should be there or not, but rather like, hey, we as a country are taking part of this. This is a 21st century a liberal democracy, and there is no one really caring about what our Air Force is doing with thousands of airstrikes. And I thought that in itself, I think, is problematic, because we need to know, like, this is being done for a small country, but this is being done in our name. And it's like, we don't even check. Like, the Dutch Royal Air Force wouldn't even say whether they're bombing in Syria or Iraq. They would just say like, oh, somewhere in the theater that is Syria and Iraq. And it's like, look, if there is like a gigantic civilian casualty incident, which there were, and it is not being a spotlight being put on. It's like, like no one's gonna care, right? And I think that's really problematic. So that was definitely a very driving factor for me to like, okay, what can we do to find things out? And it was just not just me, right? Like, in later years, there were very good investigations, and I think also collaborative spirit is very important, because I mean, you hear Melissa and Reina talking, right? And it's like, you have all these different skill sets that I know nothing about. It's like, you know, I look up to them for what they are doing, you know, and I would like reach out like, hey, I don't know nothing, or like, I don't know about this missile. I have no idea how to make it into a 3D model, but I would really love to know how to do it, or not how to do it, but like, should we team up on this? And I think that's also a lot, right? Like, I would ask questions like, hey, I have this missile remnant. I think it may be this or that, but like going to an expert and ask like, what do you think this could be? Or it's like, is it a bomb? Is it a missile? You know, like, you know, you learn along the way. Like, I think a lot because you're interested in something. And it's the same with the grandpa photo that Reina mentioned, right? I think also for people that are watching right now, it's like, you don't necessarily need to take something out of a conflict or something horrific, but it can also be something, you know, just for fun, indeed. Like, I think photos from old family photos or even old vacation photos are a great way to start geolocation. So that was a good one to mention.
I mean, I don't think any of us have well, unless I'm completely unaware, a personal connection with North Korea and its arms program. But I mean, there is something like the three of us all look at North Korea because it is the most difficult problem in the space, right? Is that the reason why you both look at North Korea, Melissa, first?
Sorry. I think just because it was such a closed society. When I was an undergraduate, I actually started learning Chinese, and I thought I was going to be a specialist studying conflict with China. But you know, once I did this internship with International Crisis Group in Seoul, I began to realize how skilled you really have to be to understand what's happening, and how little information is being shared out by sources that are credible. And it really gave me a passion for trying it because it was the hardest. So using, I switched over to classes on Korea, and I studied, you know, the war, the history, the culture, the delicious food. And I got a chance, I think, to feel like I was in this niche that was hard. It made me feel like I was competitive, even though I was, you know, like a 24-year-old kid.
Yeah, I mean, I skipped out of quite a serious senior meeting once because I realized it was my only chance to be able to get Korean barbecue in Seoul. So the delicious food is certainly a big motivating part. Reina?
I actually lived in Korea. I lived there for 5 years, and I taught English in a province in Gyeonggi, which encompasses Seoul. But while I was there, there was the sinking of the ROKS Chonan, a Navy vessel suspected by North Korean submarine, and then there was also the shelling of Yongpyeon. And so being there and kind of seeing firsthand some of the military activity by North Korea kind of put a bug in my ear when it came to once I got into graduate school and where I would focus my attention when it came to OSINT. I also look at like some of the Japanese nuclear power plants. I'd spent some time in Japan and left a couple of, like a week before the massive earthquake and tsunami that followed. And so having experience in the areas and living there kind of was a great impetus for me when it came to trying to figure out like what area of the world I'd like to focus. But I do want to say that, you know, food in Korea is amazing. I crave Korean food. Luckily, there's a place here in Monterey that I can go to for Korean fried chicken. So yeah, no, it definitely helps if you have like an interest in an area of the world, or if you've traveled and you're trying to find the place. I did Peace Corps. I was a returned Peace Corps volunteer for Indonesia. And so when I first started getting into Google Earth, I would try and find my village because like I can search it, but it wouldn't necessarily come up. So like searching nearby and then expanding my search from there. So a lot of times for me, it had to do with that I had experience with it. And other times it was just that something just sounded interesting.
Thank you very much. So I said we would go for half an hour and then we'd try and go to the audience. And I also said that I, like many other people, are a bit fed up with Zoom and don't want to spend all day on it. So we're going to try and finish promptly at 22. So our first question from an anonymous attendee that clearly wants to do some OSINT and wants some help doing it. So their question is, when we start an investigation independently, what are your tips for collaborating with other experts and bringing other people onto a freelance investigation? And I think I'll definitely throw that one at Christian, and maybe Raina and Melissa, you can chime in if you have something to say as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, I think Twitter is a great way to signal what you're doing to other people. I think if it's a specific investigation, like let's say you are focused on airstrikes, it's probably airstrikes, let's say in Iraq. I mean, it's probably useful to tag some people that you already know are working on these kind of topics, right? Like it will be of greater interest to them to pick it up and maybe collaborate with you, or maybe like highlight your finding. Than maybe Melissa or Raina. But if you're working on North Korea or something related, right, it may be more useful to tag them than to tag someone who's working on airstrikes. And I think other than that, I think it's really, I see this community mostly as a community that's very open, even if you're an anonymous contributor. I think if everything happens in good faith, right? Like it's online, but I think the strength of OSINT, of course, is you don't really need to, it's not the person that matters, it's the work that matters. And if you put work out there that may not be good, it can be clearly checked. So the strength is, of course, like if you have a finding in geolocation or a chronolocation, right, determining the exact time, or something along those lines. If it's all based on openly available information, Raina, Melissa, or I, we can just like check it ourselves to see like, hey, what's the worth? And then it's like, oh, wow, this is a great finding by this person. So, I think there are many ways, even if you have not your own topic, to get started. I would definitely check out, if you follow different OSINT practitioners or what I would say open source investigation. I mean, there are often like public calls for help, right? Think of Bellingcat that has often. I'm looking at the screen and it's like, wow, the brand is like typing on the camera. But they're often like Bellingcat. They have like these public call outs, right, for help. I think it's great to get started there. And the same, if you want to start in a more fun way, is quiz time on Twitter. And it's like more like, collaborative effort to find like a more less serious photos and videos and questions to find out with openly available information. But happy to hear from Melissa and Raina as well. What you think?
Yeah, I think that open source is so interdisciplinary that collaborating should be mandatory, because you can say you're an expert at OSINT, but I mean that is so broad. You can't be an expert in everything. So as Christian said, if there's someone with some technical experience that you think would be helpful to you, then by all means reach out to them. I think another area that's worth looking into are local people, to the extent that it's safe and ethical to talk to them. Because I mean, all three of us are working on issues that are far away from us, and we can do the best we can with publicly available information, but making sure that you have the cultural context and understanding of everything from local architecture to road routes and things like that can be really helpful. So to the extent it's safe and ethical to include someone locally, I would definitely opt to do that. And I'm actually quite famous for tapping my family constantly. So I've tapped my mother, who's a microbiologist and worked in laboratories, so that when I was looking at photos of North Korean pesticide factory, she could help me identify all the equipment in the laboratory. And I've had my father help me on the missile acceleration. And I had a cousin actually named Jim Sandusky, who's a long-range truck driver, and he actually probably helped me on one of the biggest coups of my career, which was working with Jeffrey Lewis to identify some warehouses in Jongchon where North Korea stores its long-range transporter erectors for their ICBMs. And I made a 3D model of the building using video of the inside. And I had a 3D model that another pair of people had made, and it fit like a glove. And I was so happy and so relieved that, this other group made a 3D model. I made a 3D model, one fit into the other, but I could not figure out how to park that truck because it had 8 axles on it. And, you could see some of them were fixed and some of them weren't, but I just couldn't figure out how to park it. So I kind of complained on my Facebook just to my family because I was too embarrassed to admit to Jeffrey and the world that I didn't know how to park it. And my cousin who drives long range trucks was like, oh, you just put it up on casters. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. I just didn't have that piece of expertise to be able to figure it out alone.
Well, that's awesome. I was going to start talking about this time I spoke to a distant cousin about machine tools in the backwoods in New Hampshire, but I think you get the picture of like use every resource you can, right, to get where you want to get. So we have a few more questions, so maybe we'll post them in maybe to our panelists, and maybe we can put them up on Twitter or something like that. But I want to close on a question on your own security and cybersecurity. So keeping your computer secure and protecting yourself. So how have you protected yourself, or do you have like lessons for people that are starting out on this, on what kind of tools they should use to protect themselves? Melissa, to you as your Brenna, go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to say I'm lucky enough to have a work laptop that I can use, and so though I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have to just throw away my regular laptop because I was searching North Korean websites on my personal one. However, if you can get your hands on a good program that checks for malware constantly, is always great. I try to use web browsers that block my IP address. So our VPNs are always good. You can find some that are free. You just might have to keep creating new email addresses to get free trials every 30 days. But if you're interested in it and you don't have a lot of resources to pay for like a yearly subscription, then those are definitely options. But yeah.
Does anyone else have anything to add on this?
I think Raina gave all the really great tips. I think know what you're getting into. I didn't, and I've been hacked many times. So I've learned from those, but Raina's got all the great tips. I think the only other thing I would add would be to use multi-factor authentication on your devices and the emails that you do choose to use. So you can usually add that on for free for your personal life. So like your bank accounts, your shopping and that kind of thing. I use one email address, and then for anything to do with work, I use a different email address, which has been hacked a lot of times. Google's got some physical keys you can attach to your Google account if you use Gmail. Proton Mail is another really great option for secure communication. But honestly, Raina covered all the big ones.
So I think maybe we could get a few resources shared on these kind of things on a thread or through your personal Twitter after this, so people can go have a look. I mean, I had a colleague, Lauren Bodo, who got himself basically a privacy and security course for Christmas, in like a strange personal gift to give, and I think that's I mean he's extremely serious counter-terrorism investigator, but like they're basically there are off-the-shelf tools that you can get either for free or for quite a small amount of money to protect yourself. So if you want a physical key, you're going to need to buy it, right? But a lot of the other tools are already available, and you can do smart things and protect yourself. So that is all I said we were going to go for, and I'll try and stick to that. So that's the end of this webinar. Thank you so much to Melissa, Rainier, and Christian for agreeing to participate and lending their time to this. I know at least one to maybe 20 of you, or even all of you, will be a part of the OSINT community and will be part of the OSINT community, and can continue to engage on all kinds of questions and topics. And as it kind of been alluded to, maybe like one day you're watching and the next week you're on the panel. So we look forward to seeing what all our participants get up to. So thank you very much, and we will see you all online soon, and maybe in person